Welcome to the first day of your new reality. Your world as you know it will never be the same. It's time to wake up and see the world as it is. Welcome to the Year 2045 podcast. I'm your futurist and host, Rami Kala. In our podcast, we're going to bring on guest speakers to talk about virtual and augmented reality, mixed reality, AI, robots, Skynet, and much, much more. So hang on and let's go. Today, I am super excited to have as my guest, Sid. Sid is an assistant professor of computer science in the School of Computing, Informatics, and Decision System Engineering at Arizona State University. Professor Sid was a staff scientist at the United Technologies Research Center in Berkeley. Prior to that, he was a postdoctoral researcher in the Rugs Research Group at the University of California, Berkeley. He received his PhD in computer science from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. His research interests include robotics and AI, with a focus on reasoning, planning, and acting under uncertainty. His work on household robotics has received coverage from international news media. His dissertation work received the Best Paper Award at the International Conference on Automated Planning and Scheduling, ICAPS, and an Outstanding Dissertation Award from the Department of Computer Science at UMass Amherst. Welcome, Sid.
Pleasure to be here.
So happy to have you on the show. How's your day going so far?
Good. How about you?
Oh, it's going well. Not bad for a Wednesday. Well, cool. It was very impressive resume. Is there anything that you want to kind of give us a little bit of background about yourself or anything else that we didn't have in there that you wanted to elaborate?
So I can tell you a little bit about my research more specifically. So I'm interested in figuring out how to get autonomous agents to reason and act, to do stuff for us. So this means, for instance, let's say you have a household robot and you want it to do stuff for you. So someday you might want it to do the laundry. Next day you want it to maybe arrange the room and so on. So in some sense, you want this robot to be able to accept high-level commands, right? You don't want to have to program it for every new task. So it should be generalizable in some sense, versatile, do multiple things. And of course, it should be reliable, right? So you want to know, for instance, when it's safe to use the robot, when you're on your own out there, sort of. And, it goes beyond formal guarantees. So we want to provide formal guarantees. This is where it's safe. But you also want it to be explainable and you want it to take care of privacy issues and so on. So that's roughly the sort of problems I work on, and it's a bit of a rabbit hole. The more you think about it, the more interesting it becomes.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the Jetsons robot cleaning lady. And you think about, I've worked with, I was in Las Vegas and I was talking to some of the staff that work at some of these mansions. They were telling me about some of the stuff that goes on. So in the mansions that they can't talk about. So privacy would be an issue if you have a robot in there, living in your home and seeing everything and not divulging it to everybody. So I didn't even think about the privacy concern. But that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or even at a more minuscule level, right? You said do the laundry, but then you have guests over. Do you want it to drag your dirty laundry hamper across the room when they're there? So
I have one of those vacuum cleaners that, the robot vacuum cleaners. We call it Tweaky, from Buck Rogers. And it's pretty good. I mean, there are times I feel like, I swear, like I'll be working in my study and it'll come in and just keep, ramming in me and coming around the chair and stuff. I'm like, can you get out of the room, Tweaky? But you're talking about a step above that, right? This robot's going to actually come in, do the laundry, make the bed. I mean, this thing is fully autonomous, and that would be awesome.
Yeah, autonomous to some extent, but versatile at the least. So you don't want it to just do the laundry. You want it to go a little bit beyond.
That's fascinating. And before we dive a little deeper, tell me a little about what got you into this field. What made you passionate? Why are you passionate about this? How'd you start?
Initially, it was, I started my education with a mathematics major, and that was very beautiful. And I wanted to somehow connect this with reality. Mm-hmm. And then I started reading sci-fi. So the logical conclusion of that was AI.
And this was when you'd finished your math undergrad and then got into AI after that? Okay, that's awesome. And why are you passionate about it? What gets you excited about it?
So one puzzling, so it's a lot of curiosity. How do we reason and act? How do we reason about things? How do we figure out how to do the laundry? How do we figure out, if I have to do the laundry, I have to go fetch things first, find out what's dirty, put them in. There's so much of reasoning and decision making that we're doing very easily. And then if you start looking at how to get computers or autonomous systems to do that, you realize it's actually very hard to encode this sort of stuff and make it
Mm-hmm.
generalizable. So
Mm-hmm.
the curiosity is the prime driving factor here.
That's awesome. Very cool. Let's talk a little about where things are now. So, in the show we go out into the future, but let's kind of start with where we are today and with AI and robotics.
So at the moment, at present, we are discovering some very new technology, and we're
Mm-hmm.
discovering new tools. So AI has been, the field started around the 50s. That's when
Mm-hmm.
the first mentions of the field of the terminology AI
Mm-hmm.
came about. And since then, it's gone through lots of phases, and it's been slowly gathering momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at a stage now where we've got some of the basic building blocks, or at least the blocks that we think will be very useful. So
Mm-hmm.
learning techniques have matured quite a lot. We can do stuff like facial recognition or object detection for computer vision kind of applications. And we're obviously seeing lots of advances in autonomous gameplay, right?
Mm-hmm.
And different industries have started realizing value from these previously theoretical techniques. So you see autonomous cars, and that industry is taking off. So all of them are doing both. They're highlighting what the current problems are, where the gaps are, and also doing the engineering and research required to develop each of these threads into applications.
Mm-hmm.
So,
No, it's interesting. I remember as a boy, I met a robot. I was probably like, I don't know, 10 years old, and it came up to me and started talking. And to this day, I don't know if it was just programmed or somebody was doing it remotely, but I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And now you see things like Sofia, who's granted citizenship over in Saudi Arabia. I guess what are your thoughts about something like Sofia, where you hear people, there's some fear behind that. You see it all over YouTube that somebody like her could turn one day and decide that that they're the superior being and humans are either their slaves or not worthy. So what are your thoughts?
I don't know about the specific instances like this, but we have a long way to go before we can actually think of an autonomous agent at the same level as a human. And I don't know if we'd ever get there, because these are devices we are creating. These devices, and just like you have a car, there is no reason why you can't give a car citizenship, right? What stops you from doing that? So I'm not quite sure how that factors in, but it's an interesting problem of at what point do you start taking a device that you program, it's an engineered device like a calculator or something, then you expand its level of functionality to have some automation. For instance, you have autopilots in aircraft for several years now, right? And then, then where do we move to start calling something autonomous? Right? So how do we distinguish this? And at what level of autonomy do you think that you'd be starting to associate something humane about it? So I don't know if that's even a good question to ask. If it's well defined.
So basically, kind of you're saying is we're not quite there yet, but as far as and Ray Kurzweil talks about consciousness, right? At what point is something conscious? A point is something know that it exists and has that level of consciousness or that autonomy. Do you see us eventually getting to that point where machines or AI have some level of consciousness of their being?
So this is again one of those things where it's interesting because it's not very precisely defined. We don't have a test that's okay, here's the thing, and if you answer these questions or if it meets these criteria, then yes, you're conscious. So we don't even know how to characterize consciousness very well in a human, right? I know you're conscious because I just call humans conscious. Beyond that, I don't think there's a very specific meaning. So how do you answer, or how do you evaluate something for consciousness when you don't know what consciousness means precisely?
No, that makes sense. Now, I guess with with a lot of your focus on right now, you'd mentioned having robotics in the home, right? Be able to clean and do different things and activities in the house. Talk about kind of where you see that maybe in the next 10 years. If we continue on the same progress we're on now, where do you kind of see that here in the near
Right. So
future?
I think the scope of applicability or the generalizability is going to increase. And it's going to be very gradual. This is what it looks like. So for instance, the earliest robot vacuum cleaners that came out were just doing random movements. And, but now you have better versions which can do some sort of mapping and remember the home's layout and actually plan out how to clean so that they don't waste a lot of time just redoing the same area. Going beyond that is a natural next step, but also a big leap in the sense, how do we generalize it? So first, and there are several aspects of the problem. So there's the mechanical aspect. How do you create a robot that's safe to be around? So it should be sensitive to bumps and that sort of stuff. When we walk around the homes, there are sections where you have to sort of rub against each other and move, and it's considered safe. But it may not be that safe with a robot that's not designed for this kind of interaction or physical interaction. So there's the mechanical aspects of the problem. And then there's a lot of different pieces that need to be filled in. It's very hard to get a timeline because I think there are actually some missing discoveries that have to be made to make it truly generalizable. But I think you'd find limited use robots coming in much more easily. So you currently have robots in hospitals that are essentially mobile portable devices, right? They carry stuff around. They can carry reports from one point to another. They can, go into the elevator and do stuff like that. But they're essentially moving desks. They don't have manipulators. They don't have hands. So, there's a bit of stuff to be done before we can get generalizability or versatility.
Yeah, my wife works in the medical field, and at the hospital she works at, she's encountered those robots where I think she was trying to get an elevator that it told her she I guess couldn't get on, or it asked her to move out of the way because it was trying to get to one of the rooms or something. She's like, "Oh, excuse me." So, I would say be polite to the robot because you never know, it's going to remember. It's kind of like my wife; she remembers. So yeah, be nice.
Yeah, so that's another thing. How do you get it to navigate spaces with humans, right? In some places, humans are accommodating, like your wife, they let it give it room, right? But humans have a playful tendency, so sometimes they block the robot. What's the robot going to do at that stage? So those aspects of the problem aside, there's how to get it to efficiently solve the problem. Today you asked it to do the laundry. Tomorrow you say set up the dinner table or arrange the room. These are very different tasks, although they share some commonalities. So you'd expect that if it can do the laundry and move about the house and pick up stuff, next time when you ask it to arrange the home or arrange a room, it should be easier, right? Because it knows the layout and stuff. But how does it recognize? How does it generalize that? We don't have very good answers there.
I spoke with a gentleman that he was talking about the DaVinci Machine and how the doctor that had worked on creating it. He said that eventually it won't need me. And for those who don't know what that is, it allows him to do surgeries across the country. But he said that the AI in there, it's listening, it's programming. He said it won't need him because it's recording everything he's doing. And it's kind of crazy because you think about the high level and all the schooling that a surgeon goes through to get to that level, and that's something like a robot with the right AI could go in and do what a surgeon's doing. I guess at another level, do you see that with let's say I'm in the hospital, I need someone to come take my blood pressure and just check certain vitals. Do you see that being replaced here in the near future by robotics?
So that's an interesting, set of points that you raised there. First of all, the learning aspect, right? How is it learning from the surgeon? And then you can ask, is it learning, especially, how the important thing is how generalizable is it, what it's learning? So it could learn exactly the maneuvers that the robot, that the surgeon perform, but nobody's internals are the same, right? Will it adapt gracefully to somebody who has a different structure of pancreas or whatever? And the robot, the surgeon figured out what needs to be done, and they took into account all sorts of things like maybe even which procedures this patient could afford, what is better for them, that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of background and context and decision making that goes on even before the surgeon starts operating. And then, so you mentioned something about the initial tasks, which are more routine in some sense. So that raises this broader point about what's happening to the workforce and how it's going to be affected by automation and so on. So uh, there are lots of studies on this. And it looks like what we know for sure is many jobs are going to be transformed by automation, not necessarily replaced. So yeah, some parts of it, you could imagine that there's a machine where even if it's not fully automated, you say, okay, I'm going to put my arm here and it measures the blood pressure, and gives it to you, right? So that sort of stuff might happen sooner. But then every time you see this kind of automation coming in, it's not that the jobs are going away; they're just transforming into something else.
And that's what I've read about is, certain jobs, like, for instance, I'll go into, to the bank, and you got the tellers and they're doing repetitive tasks, taking your check, depositing it. And I keep thinking, this would be something that, could be done or solved with AI and giving a certain, routine set of tasks that it has to do and reprogrammed. Kind of like in the hospital, taking blood pressure.
ATMs already do some most of these things. And you can see that the bankers there are now doing the higher decision-making tasks in some sense. They're telling you where to go for different kinds of services that you might need, and maybe giving you financial advice and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and that's where, we talk about kind of where those, those workers are going to go. I mean, even in the grocery store, you have self-checkout. And I always, right now it's not, probably about, 15% of people actually use it. But eventually, we'll have it. I know Whole Foods is working on something. You put it in, it scans automatically in your card. You walk out, it runs your card, where you don't have to go through and scan everything individually. And all those routine, mundane tasks that will be, automated. That what happens to a lot of those, those people in that workforce, they're going to have to either, I guess get additional education to do higher skilled level work, or, or be out of a job. So
that's another interesting point. So automation has been increasing for several years, and this is quite independent of the field of AI. And in some cases they're related, but sometimes it's very going on its own. And with AI, there's something slightly different, which is actually better from the point of view of the workforce, because when you have an adaptive autonomous system, let's say you're in a factory and you just get a robot, and now you have to work with this robot. Right? What happens when the robot does something unexpected? So you're using robots as force multipliers in some sense, right? So you're saying, okay, there's this one person who is now saying, I'm going to create the designs and see how they actually work. And the robots are going to maybe create them, create the devices. So what if it does something unexpected? What do you do at that point? With an automated system, functionality is very limited. It's very well understood. Every time you hit a button, it's going to do the same thing. And it's easier to field support calls, for instance. Because this is a machine, this is how it's programmed, and you can debug it. But with an autonomous system that has adapted to the situation, nobody's going to be an expert on that. You can't go always to PhDs in computer science to say, is this wrong what the robot is doing, or is it right? And so in some sense, in order for autonomous systems to be even feasible as broad, wide-scale deployments, we need a slightly different paradigm where the autonomous system can explain itself. So it should be able to interact with this factory worker, and the factory worker should be able to say, hey, why did you do this? Why did you move out of the way when I asked you to bring me this part?
That's kind of what makes us, I think right now what makes us human. A lot of the machines we work with, have certain programming, but as humans, we're able to adapt and make decisions quickly. Like you said, the doctor is able to say, okay, can the patient afford this surgery? What other options are there? And be able to just really adapt to their environment. And, having that emotional, piece to our, how we think, and, being emotionally sensitive in those environments. So that'll be interesting. And that's, to see kind of where that goes, with autonomous, AI and robotics. Are they going to have, those human capabilities? And at that point, will we say, okay, they're conscious, because they act like humans, I guess that'll be kind of, I think of like iRobot. All of a sudden, the robot, started acting, more human, and, being aware of itself. And they said, okay, this is an anomaly,
But then this is where the problem becomes more interesting, right? So how do you distinguish something that's just mock-up, right? How do you distinguish it from, like the mechanical Turk, which was like a robot, but there was a person sitting inside it and operating it. So how do you distinguish it from something that's just designed to mimic dialogue, or just designed to make expressions in a natural way, but doesn't have anything sophisticated going on behind it?
Yeah, no, it definitely adds a lot of questions. One of the things I wanted to ask too was when we do because our company does virtual reality, 3D animation, and augmented reality, holograms and things, and my artists always talk about the Uncanny Valley, right? Between fake and realistic, right? Am I going to create something that the eye will recognize right away? That's not real. The Uncanny Valley, always that place in between where it's like it kind of looks real, but not really, and you can tell. But then there's the other, you come out the other end where it actually looks very realistic. And you're starting to see that now with, even Sofia. I mean, her skin, they're trying to give her that realistic human look. And we're seeing that a lot more with animation in films and videos. Do you see with robotics, at least what you're doing, like, we're talking about like the household work, things like that. Do you think people will want, I guess the Uncanny Valley going to be an issue? Are people going to either want something that looks very robotic or something that looks very human? Because that middle ground, I think, would be kind of odd. I don't know.
That's right. That's right. And it's not clear to me that in order for a robot or an autonomous system to be helpful, it has to look like a human or act like a human or behave like a human. We work with smartphones. We really, find them very useful. They have nothing to do with being humane or having any kind of conscious output interface. So in that sense, I think there are some places where people are actually doing research to create robots as companions for disabled communities, so especially for children who have some sort of issues. And there's some interesting research. The robot can act as a companion, and there it makes some sort of sense to try to get the robot to mimic expressions or to smile at the right times and so on, just to make the interaction easier. But for a household robot in a regular setting, the important thing is safety and taskability, right? You don't really, in fact, in some sense, it would be unethical to make it seem like the robot is a human in those situations. You should know that it's a device, you bought it. Here's your service agreement, here are its safety conditions, and don't go beyond these specifications. So in some sense, in that particular application, at least, it makes perfect sense to not even approach the Uncanny Valley. It's
interesting. Yeah, no, I think you kind of have to pick, because I think that if you get in the Uncanny Valley, it's almost a little bit freaky, I guess. If something is trying to look real, but it's not. But talking about mimicking, I have a 10-month-old at home right now, and it's funny. I tell my wife, like, he's always smiling and happy because we're always smiling and happy at him. And last night, I was playing with him. I made a crying face, and he started to cry, right away. But it's kind of like, with AI. I mean, it's going to pattern us and recognize certain expressions, and then probably put in its memory bank and be able to pull those out when it needs to, and as it learns, like humans do at some point. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. In fact, and different cultures have different ways of responding, different points at which they smile, and children have been growing up in those cultures and learning it very differently. So clearly, yeah, they draw from what they see.
Yeah, some cultures don't smile as much, especially us Americans. No, and you made a good point about, having robots as caregivers and possibly having them, with you. And I mean, like elderly people. I mean, I've gone, to nursing homes, and, just having that companion, there's somebody to talk to. A lot of times they just want someone to talk to. And if you had, a robot in there, with AI that looked human, and they could sit by their bedside and, let them tell their stories, and, that could really make a big difference for a lot of people. So that's a really good point. But I think in that case, yeah, it would have to probably have more of a human look to it.
Right. And they did some experiments in this, and this is a very active area of research. So it turns out that many times they don't really care about the look being human and so on. So it can be a screen. But if it's providing the right kind of interaction, like playing a game with them or engaging them in dialogue, that also helps. And in some sense, it's more of an honest perspective to the person, right? That this is a machine. If we all understand it's a machine, but it's still entertainment, and it's still interactive, and it's still useful.
I know we talked a little bit briefly about, if things get out of control, and, our our housekeeper decides to turn on us, and, decides that we're not, worth being here. do we have controls? Do we have ability to turn it off and, I guess, essentially unplug the AI?
At the moment, yes. For now, we are nowhere near any kind of these disaster scenarios, and everything is very much in the control. In fact, it takes a lot of control to get it to go, to get it to work. So we are not at that level. That's the yeah. If does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's good. I think there's a lot of talk about nanotechnology and replicating itself, and I think of like Terminator. They started building more Terminators, But it's funny, and people, make fun of some of these movies. But more and more, I'm seeing, life imitating art, and sometimes the other way around. But things like Minority Report and some of these sci-fi movies that we're seeing, now we're seeing holograms and being able to project, with glasses on, and so it's really facial recognition and things that we saw in movies.
That's right. It's certainly a time where AI has matured to the point where ethics in AI and responsible research and all of these become really relevant issues. And I'm glad that these are actually being recognized. There are people who are working specifically on these kind of problems. And in general, there is a much greater awareness that, even when you're educating students, for instance, they, to be mindful of ethics, what privacy issues are and safety issues, to basically create more responsible researchers.
That's a great point. Last two questions. One, where do you see things, obviously the name of the podcast, Year2045. So just using your imagination a little bit, staying on this trajectory, where do you see things, out in Year2045? And then last question is, what are you most excited about?
Okay. So 2045, it's a very hard thing to speculate for an exact timeline. So I think there are some discoveries that have to be made. It's very hard to predict when exactly they happen. But on specific applications where, for instance, autonomous cars, this is something where I think we could actually see autonomous cars on the road. And as you can see now, it's a gradual shift. You have cruise control, then lane keeping, then more like lane changing, and so on. And so it's on the right track. That sort of stuff hopefully would occur by then. In robotics, I think there's good progress on grasping, manipulation, these finer movements. So hopefully we'd have, at least in some restricted scenarios, actual robots like humanoid robots that can help out, that have some sort of explainability, and they're not fully versatile yet, but for some range of tasks you can use them and they're helping. I think we should be there. The most exciting things, can we get a handle on addressing the explainability, reliability, and generalizability, these aspects of the problem? And common to all of these, there's this thing called of abstraction. How do we generate abstractions efficiently? So for instance, if you watched me just cleaning up the room, and then I asked you to describe it to me, you'd probably say something like, well, you picked up these objects, you put them there, and you intuitively create this abstraction. Whereas what you saw actually was, if we described it in a video, it was 60 frames per second or whatever, and I was just executing some trajectories. So you have this abstraction generating mechanism, and that's very helpful in generalizing tasks because the same kind of pickups and placements are required to clean up, to arrange, to do all sorts of things. It's also very good to explain, right? What am I doing? I'm picking up things, and it's easy for people to understand. So there's this common thread of how do we generate that abstraction. So I'm excited about what might happen on that theoretical problem in the next few years.
Awesome. Well, I could talk to you all day, but we're trying to keep the show in a half hour, but I could do this all day. So really awesome having you on, Sid. This was a really fun conversation. Hope you enjoyed yourself, and just thank you for being a guest on our show.
It was a lot of fun for me. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.